I'm Alex Berge, and this is The Intruder. The first time the intruder appeared, all he did was wash his hands. It had been a nameless night in which I'd been lying on my couch in a hypnotic loop of SportsCenter replays. In through the front door, the intruder entered my darkened living room as if I wasn't there. I'd been leaving the front door open for weeks, swept up in a groundless hope that Gwen would return. I didn't want her to feel unwelcome. Though, with the intruder in my house that night, moving toward the kitchen, I didn't think of Gwen or much of anything else. Stunned, I said nothing, remained still, unsure if we were really there. The intruder found the kitchen's light. I crept to the threshold and peeked around the corner. At the sink, I saw the intruder hunched down, dressed in all black, with a ski mask covering his narrow head, pumping the hand soap and scrubbing between his thin fingers. I watched droplets spatter the tile floor as he wrung dry his hands. Soon he approached me. Face to face, he cleared his throat and shook his head from side to side slowly, mournfully. His body, like a former Olympian's, was taut but marred by time. He handed me the towel. He grinned through the knit mask. "Excuse me," he said. I didn't recognize his voice. I didn't feel as unsafe as I felt helpless. The intruder slid out the front door and into the voiceless night. He moved with an incredible softness that left me full of a scream I did nothing with. Of course, the police officer asked the obvious questions, and I answered honestly. He was stocky and stern and spoke at me suspiciously, glancing around my kitchen. "And this intruder," he said, "he broke into your home, stole nothing of value, delivered no physical threat, washed his hands and left. Is that correct?" "He didn't break in so much as he walked in." Then I added, "I keep the place dark, so maybe he thought the house was empty." "So the intruder entered through an unlocked door," the officer said. "Someone might return," I said, straightening up in the kitchen chair. "I'm waiting." "How many days, would you estimate, have you been leaving your house exposed?" the officer asked. I laughed. "I'm not some dip who leaves the door unlocked all the time," I said. "Only when I'm home is the front door unlocked." "This person you're expecting, he or she doesn't have keys or your phone number?" he asked. I said, "What are the next steps in the investigation, officer?" The officer looked away and I knew he'd laugh about me later. "Our next step is you keeping your doors locked, unless you want intruders." He smirked and began walking out. "If anything else like this happens," he said, "don't hesitate to call us back." If the intruder returned, I wouldn't be able to face this officer or any officer again. I wouldn't be able to admit that an intruder visited me, damaged nothing, and then left me as I'd been before, fractured and alone. It seemed that, in the eyes of the authorities, a violation of personal space and property was not a viable reason for panic. For the rest of the weekend, I kept the door locked and slept terribly. For the next week, I went to work every morning after locking all the doors, and at night, I whispered apologies to Gwen as I locked the front door before sitting in a bath of my TV's silver haze. In the days after the intruder's visit, I spent hours at work writing Gwen an email with instructions regarding her return. Should she come back, I wrote, she'd need to call me to let her in. She had since changed her phone number, and in the email I told her that it made sense, that we were moving on, and that a fresh start is a fresh start. I wrote out my cell and landline numbers, punctuating them with a tiny smiley face, in case she'd forgotten them. Her keys were still where she'd left them on the kitchen table after she and a nominal moving crew finished hauling her things to their truck and away to her new apartment. I didn't explain what had happened with the intruder because I didn't want her to worry that if she moved back, we'd be in any danger. If I mentioned that, I'd then have to convince her that other than a sense of violation and eeriness, the intruder's presence hadn't seemed aggressive or in pursuit of anything valuable. I didn't want to muddle the message too badly. Checked my inbox incessantly for a reply, but nothing ever came. The intruder's visit began to fade from my mind, but it never disappeared completely. Even with the door locked all night, my eyes bounced from my TV to the doorknob often, even at the slightest sound. I continued living in the darkness I'd become accustomed to, surrounded by shadows, finding myself wondering if he'd ever come back. On a Tuesday in the fall, around 3 in the morning, I woke to the coffee machine sputtering and hissing. It's a single serving pod, a gift we'd received from the realty company that sold us the house. The cacophonic word tricked me into thinking it was those first days in the house with Gwen. The moon was dimming, giving way to the day's new sun. In a daze, I rolled from my bed and followed the trail of light and aroma to the kitchen, where I found the intruder sitting at the table. "Go back to sleep," he said. The ceiling light crackled and my eyes danced into focus. He was dressed in black. He slurped his coffee. "Why are you here?" I said, gently panicking. "Leave." "Your bagels are moldy," said the intruder. He was gloved this time, and he gripped the coffee mug close to his chest. He blew to cool its contents. "It's always so dark in here." I didn't respond, and in one deep gulp, he finished the drink and stood slowly. Setting the mug in the sink, he thanked me for the coffee and walked toward me. Closing my eyes, waiting for impact, I felt his hands grab each of my shoulders and squeeze lightly. I shook from the middle out. I'd never fight back. I thought, if he's going to kill me, I must remember to think of Gwen before I take my final breath. My nose began to run, and my throat welled into a quick cough that might precede a full-blown weep, something I hadn't experienced in years, maybe decades. He'd been holding my shoulders for a matter of seconds before I sensed something inside me wake, an urgency to grab him, to hurt him, to hug him, to never cede anything ever again. I reached my arms out and opened my eyes. The intruder was gone. The house was dreamily lit. I whispered, "Where'd you go?" By the front door, the one I had locked hours before, I found the intruder with one gloved hand on the knob, the other in a fist at his side. I stared at him. He smiled. We were alone, and only one of us knew what the other looked like. "What did you take?" I asked. I steadied my body. "I think that's what this is all about. You want something of mine. I don't have anything for you." He raised his hands, spreading his fingers. Nothing fell. His arms dropped and he was out the door. I dashed outside after him, hoping to see which way he ran. He disappeared around the curve leading to the heart of the neighborhood. Inside, I locked the door and washed the mug he'd drunk from and went to take a shower. It was a little before 4 a.m. I got dressed and drove to work. In my rearview mirror, the day was firing up on the verge of explosion. I replayed his most recent visit each night as I lay in bed, listening for the wriggle of the door or the jingle of keys or the desperate knocks. She never called. My life continued, but I remembered how his hands felt on my shoulders. I couldn't help but think that he would return. Thank you.